I do want to say, because I wanted to say this, there's a very nice man that's been down in the court throughout the case, and he's been, observing, and he had a bit of a hip operation in the middle of it, Christy, but he is going to have to listen in for the verdict because he'll be away, but he furnished me with Werther's original throughout the trial.
Okay.
We got a little fondness, a little friendship together, and I was delighted to see him back after he had his operation. But he's one of many people that have been down there. They're like a little family of people that go into the Special Criminal Court. They can tell you everything.
Yeah.
Do you know when I go snoozies in the middle of it, they'd be able to tell me exactly what was said. They understand the intricacies of the court. They're interested. Yeah,
it's a very funny environment because you do get to know people to see, of course, but it's also everybody gets to know everybody, and sometimes it's easy to forget that there's people on trial for murder sitting very close to people who've been had a grievous loss.
We've been there so long that everybody is so familiar with everybody else in the case. 52 days of evidence,
which is a long time. Most even murder trials are probably done in 4 working weeks, 20 days or so, aren't they? Even quite complex ones can be done quite quickly. So it is a long time, and a lot of quite technical evidence as well, which we're probably going to end up with speaking about today.
Well, today we're going to concentrate on Jason Bonney and Paul Murphy and the cases against them and the closing speeches that their defence barristers made today. There's obviously 2. So John Fitzgerald, Senior Counsel, represents Jason Bonney, and he started. So his closing speech took a little over an hour, I think, and he basically talked about how the evidence against Bonney is the car leaving his house in Drina Woods, I think it's called, in Portmarnock at 11:36 a.m. On that February the 5th. It makes its way to Bella Street, and at 12:16 it arrives there, and it leaves again at 12:40, returning to Drina Woods at 13:18, where it leaves there again at 13:22. We see some CCTV footage there, and then it drives to St Vincent's, the state say, club at 2:05, where the state say he picked up a man that we've called Flatcap and delivered him wherever. This car that the state say Jason Bonney was driving, the black BMW car, arrived home again at 3:50 that day.
Yeah.
Okay.
So they've spoken as well about how the cars can be seen leaving in convoy from the GA ground, and we've already seen CCTV evidence of the 6 men from the Regency, or who was alleged to be them, but nobody's really disputing that, gone into the GA pitch. And then you see what the state described as 6 cars in convoy leaving, and they have also said yesterday that there was a man, in those 6 cars, there's one man in each car fleeing the scene effectively.
Mm-hmm. So John Fitzgerald, Senior Counsel, said there's a number of holes in this whole case, basically, of the state, and he says that, of course, it's not Jason Bonney or his defence's obligation to defend the case. It's the obligation of the state to prove it beyond all reasonable doubt. But they did defend it, he said, because it was Jason Bonney that brought these witnesses over the last few days in. They were sort of bizarre. It was like as if they were lobbed in at the last minute, which of course that's how it felt, but it wasn't. It was their time after the prosecution finished. So when he was questioned, first of all, I think he said that he was driving that BMW Jeep when it left his house, but he states that he went to Newbrook, where he had this house under construction, and that he was kind of pottering and working there over the day, and collecting stuff. He had left the car and he was driving a truck. Now, he has claimed in his defence that it was from that Newbrook property that his father, the late William Bonney, drove the car away, really at the kind of important times, which was when the Regency happened.
So you can see why he's brought. It's quite rare for people to defend gangland cases as such. Like normally it's a prosecution, and then that's really the end we hear about it. Normally people don't produce witnesses. He produced two that certainly put a different narrative forward, that he could not have been at the Regency at the time suggested, or another witness who suggested he had seen the father drive the car. So it's quite obviously that's a very strong defence, that like he can't be there and be convicted. And of course he's facing a charge of facilitation of the Regency shooting. We did,
knowing of the existence of the organised,
of the criminal gang, basically,
being the Hutch organised crime group. That came up actually in Paul Murphy's defence about the knowing of this group's existence. But he basically, and I'm not going to, as you can see, I have a notebook full of notes yet again, but he basically said that Mr. Bonney had stated that he was the driver of the car that left the house in the morning, and that he was the one that gave that information to the state, and then that the state then presume that he's in the car for the rest of the day. So the car is traced by CCTV. This enormous job was done to trace the cars. And when we were watching the CCTV, look, as we've said a few times, my eyesight isn't great, but the screen is quite a distance from you. And, you're looking at grainy footage from a distance, but we were constantly pointed out which car was believed to be, the state believed was his. The BMW is making its way first to Bella Street, and then they say onwards it sits waiting before, obviously there's a call made and they go to collect for the getaway. But he was basically saying that, they don't prove beyond reasonable doubt that he is the one that's driving it all day. They only know that he was driving it that morning because he told them. And that there's no images of him in the car, or sort of clear images. This isn't HD quality.
No.
This is
is from shops, from various
from a bus, from people's homes out onto the street. And oftentimes when they were going through it, you'd see, it would move fast. So you'd sort of see when they slowed it down, it would go a bit blurrier. So they were relying on a broken light at the back of it to sort of constantly identify it, and a couple of other markings on the Jeep, including the dirt on it. So he says that the Sarah Sked, who's brought in, that she's basically brought in to sort of reiterate in a way technically what the state have said, but she's looking at phone traffic as well. And of course his phone is at, or could be at, the Newbrook property when he says he was, and it goes dead for a period of time during the day, or it's not answered at the very least. Sorry, it isn't switched off, I think it isn't answered. They've details of calls that come through that he takes that are always when he's at this Newbrook where he says he was. So he's putting it up to the state really to say to them that, following this vehicle and not being able to see it's him, he has given a different story. You've believed the beginning of his story, but you haven't believed the rest of his story. And also he has produced witnesses.
So I mean, he obviously produced two witnesses. One is somebody he's known for 30 years. She described in previous testimony how he had called to her home at a certain time that would put in doubt, and that she'd also seen his father there, Willie, and then they produced another witness.
So the first witness actually says that Willie Bonney called to her door. This is Julie McGlynn. And she says the father called to the mother's door that morning. She was in her mother's house, that he came in to use the bathroom, came and had a cup of tea with her. And that Jason Bonney, while they were having this cup of tea, called to the door and he came in as well. She sort of saw both of them to the front door, to the mother's front door. The mother hadn't arrived back from Mass. And that she saw Jason go into the house / construction site on Newbrook, and she saw Willie Bonney drive away in that Jeep. Now there was an argument over the Jeep anyway, and there has been evidence that the family fell out, that Jason Bonney and his father did fall out. Because his actual Jason Bonney's brother-in-law took to the stand yesterday. Paul Byrne is his name, who's married to Jason Bonney's sister.
and he gave a different account of the father's movements. The father was called Willie Bonney. He was involved in construction. Him and Jason had worked together at some point, but had a falling out a number of years before the Regency. But Paul Byrne spoke. He was sort of a rebuttal witness. I don't know if that's the technical term in an Irish court, but he was allowed to come forward to dispute evidence given by Paul Tyrrell, was it?
Yes.
Yes. And by he was allowed to come forward and dispute the evidence. And what he said was, he was on holidays, which is obviously, it could be traced. He was in holidays in Gran Canaria. He returned home on the 4th of February, the day before the Regency. And the next morning, as they had done for years, him and his wife, Jason Bonney's sister, called into Jason Bonney's parents, Willie and Greta. He described... For lunch, he said every day for the last 10, 15 years, every time they came home from holidays, they called into the parents the next day, or the parents-in-law in this case, and that he remembers it very clearly. Because while they were there, the radio was on, the TV was on, and they heard about the Regency and they talked about it. And he said it's something like 9/11, where you'd always remember where you were when you heard of this news. And he said he was in the house from, I think it was 11:30 or something like that. They had lunch, and William Bonney was there the whole time. They never left. So this is kind of directly contradicts what the other witness was saying.
And that his black Lexus Jeep was in the drive outside.
A black Lexus Jeep, and that he, according to him, he had never seen William Bonney in a long number of years use the BMW Jeep. Yeah. So that was his direct evidence. And that obviously, as it said in the prosecution said, both witnesses can't be correct. One of them has to be right and one of them has to be wrong.
It's a kind of an Irish thing to need to go to your mother's to eat after you've been on holidays,
well, look, he said it was
my mother would still leave in sausages and rashers for me, like if I've been in England.
Yes, well...
we were a nation that brought sausages and rashers on holidays with us for a long time in the 80s.
Well,
do you remember those days?
I do, of course.
Yeah,
I remember
people used to bring their three-piece suits.
And Barry tea bags posted over to me in Germany, I think, at one stage.
Because you just couldn't get a tea bag in any of these places.
God.
We must have thought the rest of the world was savage, you couldn't.
We did.
But you can just see that was a tradition. Actually, John Fitzgerald disputed a number of things about that. Firstly, he said that the Regency was not a 9/11 moment, that it was only of importance to people in the Dublin 1 area. Yeah. Now, I would dispute that because I do think maybe just because of media, but I think that was a very significant day in Dublin.
Well, it was actually in a broader sense, because it was, if you remember, it was in the middle of a general election, and it became a major issue in the general election. So it had a resonance beyond like a gangland story in the Sunday World. It certainly became a major issue. But
Dublin 1 certainly became ground zero for it all, but definitely it was a big issue. Yeah. But he also disputed the fact that it would be memorable. He got a bit of a laugh about this, that it would be memorable to go to your in-laws' house.
Yeah.
He liked his in-laws. Yeah. He certainly wouldn't describe, that had been memorable.
No, but I mean, he actually had the Paul Byrne was, he said, like, they came home from holidays and they always went up, and the parents always rushed out to the door and gave their daughter a hug.
The sausages.
Yeah. So look, but it is clear both cases can't be true, and obviously. Was it Paul Tyrrell? Paul Tyrrell
was a guy who was the chairman of a local sports club, and the Bonnies seemed to have their boxing club there. Yeah. And he said that he knew the car, the black BMW, and that William Bonney had always driven it. Yeah. And he said that he was driving home. Now, CCTV had been taken from his house, and his wife had been in and given evidence in relation to that earlier in the trial. But he was brought back by the defence to say he remembered that day because he was in dispute in the High Court with the Bonnies. He seemed to have taken some sort of a civil action, or there was a civil proceedings going on, that he kind of got a bit sort of nervous, I think, when he saw the car behind him, and that he recognised William Bonney as the driver. He said he pulled into his house, and you could actually see on the CCTV his white car pulling into the house, and this black BMW. Look, I'm saying that it was a black Jeep. As
Yeah,
far as
but I
could
don't think
see.
it was in dispute necessarily.
There was people nearer the screens who'd know than me.
Well, they did. Yeah, I mean, I don't think the defence really disputed that was his Jeep in the CCTV necessarily. I don't know, but
they said that John Fitzgerald said that the state didn't bring anybody along to say that they knew Bonney and saw him during this kind of, you know, drive around Dublin that would have been and the St Vincent's GAA club, that was remiss of them. They could have done that, but they didn't. So they're really just, what they're seeing is really a car.
Yeah.
That, you know, they only are saying, he repeated, they're only saying he was driving because he told them he took it out that morning.
Yeah.
But they, you know, your inference is that he was the only person that drove that car for the whole day. That's the state's inference.
Yeah. Now, of course, the state did cross-examine both of those witnesses, and Paul Tyrrell was asked why did he only come forward at this late stage. That became an issue as well. Obviously, Jason Bonney has been charged a couple of years at this stage, and he only gave his statement in I think it was September or October. So that was all became an issue as well. Why did these people come forward?
Yeah.
And then obviously the issue was raised in the prosecution's closing speech regarding Mr. Bonney saying that his parents are now dead, and therefore they're not in a position to either verify or be cross-examined on you know, basically the father being
these
sort of thrown into the mix, you know.
I mean, essentially Jason Bonney has pretty much thrown his father in as one of the getaway drivers, essentially, of the Regency.
It's certainly thrown suspicion on him, and that was some degree why Paul Byrne, his brother-in-law, said he came forward, and there was a long debate where it was said he had fallen out with him. That had been said in his statement, but he had clarified and said, I hadn't fallen out with him, I just didn't have any relationship with him, and that they hadn't he'd spoken 2 words to him in 10 years, I think he said. And you know, he said there had been, Jason Bonney had falling out with the family. Bizarrely, it was something to do with a trifle at a family meal was the source of his, which he didn't get into it. He got into it, he started getting into it, and they kind of said, look, you don't need to be.
We don't need the details.
No.
I like the details of that. How did a trifle cause such a row? Anyway.
It's a follow-up. But
I just to see there, I have it underlined there because John Fitzgerald sort of overarchingly described the state's case against Bonney as alarmingly light.
Yeah.
That's what he referred a number of times, and I think he opened with that statement that this was a very light case in the first place to have to defend, because basically he's sort of saying the state really don't have very much. Another important aspect that he raised was that about the phone, you know, and actually also about the CCTV, that there's gaps in this, you know what I mean, that they don't have it sort of minute by minute, hour by hour, whatever. He wanted 10 minutes by 10 minutes, that there's deviations or absences from Bonney in the CCTV. So he talks about that he goes off the radar at 14:48 that day, and that's up around Gracefield Road.
Grace Park Road, maybe?
Maybe it's Grace Park Road, and that they don't really catch the Jeep again until 15:46 when it resurfaces at Eddie's Fuels, where we do see CCTV of Jason Bonney getting out of that car and walking into Eddie's Fuels where he picked up something. He says these deviations or absences aren't explained, and you know that the court as a tribunal of fact can't accept that, you know, it's okay not to know where the car was or what was happening during those times. He also homed in on the fact that the Jeep, when it left Drina Woods, it did go towards Newbrook. Yeah. It took a direction. Now, there's a load of maps. There's so many maps been put before this case that both the councils and the judges have said they've never seen anything like it. I mean, there's always confusion which map you're looking for. They've books and books of maps, but there's this particular map that shows what would be his quickest way, say, for example, to St Vincent's GAA Club, and instead the Jeep seems to kind of veer towards Newbrook.
Right.
Now, you'd actually need to do a graphic of those maps ourselves to really understand that, but no doubt he felt there was enough in that to raise it in the defence, the direction of the vehicle and the turns it was taking. And again, he speaks about the calls to that phone at 11, 11:03, 11:04, 11:07, and then again at 15:17 and 15:18, and the phone is pinging off a mast which would be near enough to that Newbrook property where he said he was.
I mean, in the prosecution yesterday, they said there's clear footage of Jason Bonney leaving at 11:38, leaving his home, and the same man returns at 13:18, and that is identifiable. And then he gets out of the house and leaves again at 13:27, and it is evident that he, according to them, that he is the person leaving at 11:38, and the only reasonable inference was that he was the man driving the car all day. And and that
timing, just before you go on to the next one, is interesting, because 11:38 he is caught on the camera at Drina Woods, and this witness, the lady Julie McGlynn, said that he called to her house around 11:30. Now, the state are obviously put forward this CCTV evidence of him being at the house. He couldn't have been in the two places.
No.
But John Fitzgerald says that the state are hanging their hat on the fact that her timing was simply wrong.
Yeah.
You know, and this is so many years ago.
Yeah, well, I mean, and the prosecution obviously take a different stance. They say Julie McGlynn's evidence flies in the face of the evidence of Mr. Byrne, Jason Bonney's brother-in-law, and that he can identify Jason Bonney's Willie Bonney being there, and he can remember that day, and there's a specific reason why he can remember that day, and that Willie Bonney is in the house according to him, and they're both now, because he's deceased, this can't be verified. And they also question why Julie McGlynn came forward. When she came forward, they say she didn't speak about the incident until 18 months after he was charged. They say that has to be so what they say in the prosecution was the barrister says, I'd suggest that the evidence doesn't hold any water, and I'd suggest it was all lies. That's a direct quote. And there's no real explanation, is what she is saying. So
now he moved on to when Bonney, when the car has been seized and Bonney is questioned in the May, and he admits he told a lie under questioning. I'm trying to recall what that lie was. It must have been something to do with the car, or
I don't know. I mean, he was questioned. Now it's not he wasn't arrested.
He wasn't arrested, no, but he was, and he admits that. So he is admitting, and the defence are conceding that he did, maybe it's not a lie, but that he didn't give them information he had or something like this. So it was something that he didn't answer correctly or didn't answer at all. And he says that, you know, there's a reasonable explanation for that. He says that at that time, Jason Bonney had been issued with a Garda information message that his life was under threat, that his son had left the country, that he was terrified. He was afraid of being linked to the Regency, afraid of being linked to the Hutch family, and it is understandable that somebody in those circumstances, John Fitzgerald says, that they would, you know, not be wholly honest. And the reason for not being wholly honest was protection and fear.
Yeah. In the state's case as well, what they did say was that they followed the movement of the car along the Malahide Road in the aftermath of the Regency, going to and from this GA pitch in Marino. And what they said was the car is clearly utilised by persons involved in the shooting, and that the court has to be satisfied at the very least that the cars were involved in the Regency murder. So that's their clear case, I think.
Now, he sort of summed it up basically by saying these are his arguments, like the defence arguments. It's a thin case, number one, in that they don't have forensics from the car to show that flat cap was in it or anything like that. So they have nothing like that. They literally have the CCTV. Yeah. And it being his car. Yeah,
I mean that's the basis of their case. That you know that there isn't in all of this the Regency trial some of the things that we come to expect, like DNA evidence. You know, like it just isn't been there, and also there has been loads and loads of CCTV, and we did obviously have surveillance photos of Jonathan Dowdall and Gerry Hutch meeting dissidents up the north, but a lot of the other CCTV has been movements of cars only. So,
and evidence was given, by the way, that this car was clean. You know,
Yeah.
when I say that there's no forensics in it, the car had been cleaned, I think, a number of times between February and the May when it was seized. So John Fitzgerald said there was no obligation on Bonney to engage at all in this case.
No.
He didn't have to produce witnesses. He didn't have to give a defence. But he did make a case on his own behalf when, you know, it was up to the state to prove it, but he did put forward. He says that the witnesses were good witnesses, basically, that they'd nothing to gain, he says. And I think in particular that Tyrrell was at dispute with them at one point. The concerns about the interview, he says, you know, that this business of he didn't tell the full truth in the interview with the police he's calling that common sense. Use your common sense and you'll realise why he didn't tell everything, because he was afraid.
Yeah, I suppose there's a distinction between making a witness statement, signing it in the presence of a Garda, and I suppose which somebody does if they're arrested and they want to make a statement. Otherwise, what's happened in this case is he's been questioned, but it's a slightly less formal process, I think it's fair to say. However, Gardaí can take notes and obviously introduce them into court. There would be a distinction, I think it is fair to say, and maybe they're drawing on that distinction to a degree.
And he finally basically said that, you know, his account of what he did that day, this was being at the construction site and then going to Eddie's Fuels later in the afternoon, that it has stood the test of time, the defence say. And they say that they don't believe that the case has satisfied its weighty responsibility in proving beyond reasonable doubt.
Yeah, which is kind of where we get to have come from with Gerry Hutch as well.
Yeah. So that was Jason Bonney's case. Have you anything to add to that? Do you want to?
No, not particularly.
Jason Bonney, bizarrely today, was falling asleep.
Was he?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose
the only person that was actually properly engaged, now Paul Murphy was a bit more. Jason Bonney looked absolutely knackered. I'm sure, 54 days into the evidence.
Yeah, maybe a sleepless night.
Maybe a sleepless night, exactly. And he had just a tendency to sort of nod off, and then he was sort of, he just looked really, really tired. Paul Murphy beside him was a bit more alert, but the most alert of all was Gerry Hutch,
who always looks chilled out. It has to be
chilled out, but alert and listening to everything. And I really noticed as well, there's certain parts of the evidence, even this defence argument, that is more interesting to him because he sits forward, or he'll sit forward in the thing, and he was very interested to hear what the defence were saying about Buckingham Village.
Right.
Yeah, but we'll come on to that. So we took a break, and Bernard Condon, Senior Counsel, who is representing Paul Murphy, was asked how long his evidence would take, or his closing speech would take.
Yeah.
And he said it would take between the time of John Fitzgerald's and Fiona Murphy's. So kind of about an hour and a bit. Went for a cup of coffee, came back, and he started. And I have to say, I thought he was excellent.
Right.
Really good. I mean, he can sometimes in court come across as being... he's the sort of guy, I'll put it like this, you'd want him on your side.
Right, okay.
You wouldn't want him to be questioning you or cross-examining you. He can sometimes come across as quite aloof. Yeah. And like they're not there to be nice, but you'd feel he seems to be a bit mean or something when he's cross-examining people, but it's his job, as I say. But I thought he was excellent in his closing. So he opened by saying that the closing of the prosecution struck him as being a very broad brush of assertions. Yeah. It was very, very broad, and I think you would possibly agree with that, having sat through it.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was slightly different, of course, than it might be before a jury, and part of it is, of course, the nature of the charge, which is facilitation with knowledge of a criminal organisation, basically, to paraphrase it to a degree. So it becomes a slightly different thing, doesn't it? That they're trying to not just, they're trying to prove through a degree of membership or involvement or knowledge of this criminal organisation, the Hutch, obviously the Hutch organised crime group in this case, you know. So yeah, it is.
He said that, like, you know, where there's no evidence is sort of just brushed away. He said the forensic analysis, which is absent, they just, you know, don't kind of bother with that.
Yeah.
Sarah Sked, who's the, you know, the Garda technical expert, basically, she's been brought up in a number of cases too.
Yeah, she does. She's the phone analysis, for example.
He says that she's a consolidation of whether the primary evidence in the case is sufficient.
Yeah.
So she's sort of supposed to come in to sort of rubber stamp what is really good primary evidence, but he's saying that there was an insufficient primary evidence in the first place.
Yeah.
So her evidence to consolidate that reflects the fact that it wasn't good in the first place, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, I mean, I think you hear with Paul Murphy's, the movements of the cars, again, are a key part of the state's case. That Paul Murphy's car is located going into Buckingham Village, located coming out of Buckingham Village, and then it's located at the GA pitch coming out in this convoy, as it's described, and that they're like, that is the basis of the case. That now they heard evidence about Paul Murphy's obviously a taxi driver.
Yes.
And he had a number of receipts showing something different. The state's case is that these receipts can't be relied on, that they're not legitimate, let's put it that way. There's also evidence about how a key card was found, a key card to get into Buckingham Village, which the state locates as kind of the starting point of this conspiracy. Buckingham Village has long been associated with, it's on the road where Gerry Hutch grew up. It's a set of apartments, and the state's case is that central to this conspiracy that led to the Regency murder, and that Paul Murphy, a key card to get into there was found in Paul Murphy's home. They're not satisfied with his explanation, which was
the car,
that
I think it was found in.
It was found in his car, sorry.
Yeah.
But he did address that in Garda interviews, and he said he just found it in his taxi, and he chanced his arm, I think, to see if it would work. So the state are obviously saying that, you know, that's not a credible explanation. He's obviously given that as an explanation nonetheless. So that's a large part of the case against Paul Murphy.
And Paul Murphy's taxi, he had sort of leased it from Eddie Hutch.
Yeah.
And he used to pay him in cash for that. And Bernard Condon speaks about the state's case being kind of guilt by association and suspicion as opposed to facts. He said, he also said that he doesn't believe this case has been proved beyond reasonable doubt in any way, shape or form. He says that the state said that Buckingham Village, as you just mentioned there, was the centre of everything.
Yeah.
And he says, is that proved? What do we know about Buckingham Village and the centre of everything? Was that a flat? Was it the car park? Was it a car? You know, what was it that the state didn't really properly establish? They just sort of left it there, that it was the centre of things, but didn't dig down into that.
No, I mean, the state's case obviously is that as well. A part of the state's case is that Kevin Murray, known as Flat Cap, can be seen being dropped to Ainger Street, I think it is actually, and then, which is close to Buckingham Village. So that's a part of it, that he's dropped, and then, you know, it's their case that he then obviously re-emerges in this van at the Regency, and that there is a convoy that van is a part of, and therefore when you put it all together, you know, this leads to a inescapable guilt, I suppose.
He says that there was a suggestion during the trial that all participants of this job didn't know what the other one was doing. Now, that was something that was a remark made by Gerry Hutch in the tapes, in that journey, that famous journey with Jonathan Dowdall. Yeah. And he made some remark about, you know, sure, none of the six knew who the others were.
Yeah, I mean, he said it in conversation, and Jonathan Dowdall is talking about who did the Regency one way or another, and Gerry Hutch says, as you said, sure, even the six people don't know who they are, you know, so obviously there's, you know.
Now, Bernard Condon has strangely taken that as a piece of fact.
Yeah.
You know, he said that that was thrown into the case. Now, I think he would have done better on this argument had it been put in by perhaps the Gardaí or somebody like that. It's the fact that it was a quip in during the conversation.
Yeah.
Anyway, he says that it doesn't make sense because of that all supposed participants in this job are hanging around Buckingham Village. Are they there, he says, for tea and biscuits beforehand? And he got a bit of a laugh. That actually, Gerry Hutch found that very funny, that little bit. He says that the state are putting 2 and 2 together with this, and they're getting 600, that his client Paul Murphy was a taxi driver, that he has stated that he was working that morning or during those hours he was picking up fares, and you know, sort of, could he have picked up a fare there? Could he have picked up a fare? Like, why was he there? You know, he was working that beat kind of thing. Yeah, sorry. He says that while Mr. Murphy is in Bella Street,
but Bella Street is the lane that goes into...
It's the laneway, that we don't have much of a view of that. And that laneway is a bit of a strange little road, and it goes right the way down to Corinthians.
Yeah.
And he's sort of saying that just because the car drives in there, does that mean that he's talking to Patsy Hutch?
Yeah.
How do we know that? We've no corroborating evidence of that. Does that mean that he's having this sort of meeting in the car parks with other people? We don't know that. You've seen the car go down, and that's kind of it. The CCTV, I think, sees him pull in there at 10:45 a.m. and pull out at 11:47 a.m. Now, the state are saying that this time overlaps with Flatcap being there.
Yeah.
And Bernard Condon says he does not accept that that is proved by the state.
No, because there is obviously footage of Flatcap arriving at a certain location close by. As far as I can remember, there's no footage of him actually walking into Buckingham Village. So that's not available.
So Bernard Condon is saying, like, that basically, you know, can we say that Paul Murphy and Kevin Murray met there and spoke there? No, the state cannot. They have not proven that.
No. However, you can see the van that arrives at the Regency with Kevin Murray in it, and that is the state's case that, you know, it leaves Buckingham Village, the van, and arrives at the Regency, and Kevin Murray gets out. So in some ways, he's had to have got in as well. Like,
I mean, he's picking, of course, apart the case because that's his job. He also says that he does not accept that Paul Murphy, and that the state has proven that Paul Murphy was there when Jason Bonney was there, or when the car left.
Yeah.
So he doesn't accept that. He doesn't accept that they were travelling in convoy. At one point, they talk about the convoy coming out. I think it's out of St. Vincent's GAA Club, Casino Park.
Yeah, Casino Park is kind of the road that goes into the GAA pitch.
He says that the state have said they were in convoy cheek by jowl at that stage, which he says absolutely there's no way. He talks about the CCTV and how this car that Paul Murphy was driving in Avensis is the most common car, and they brought evidence, I think, to that regard, that it was the most common car in the taxi fleet in Dublin.
Yeah.
They brought up Paul Brady in. I missed that evidence, but I did hear about it. But they brought this Paul Brady in, and he's been in the business for as Bernard Condon says, donkey's years. He says the Avensis car is the most common. He says that the car, while the state is saying it's silver, it changes between silver, gold and green. He says that the logbook says the car is green. Mr. Murphy describes it as gold, and in the CCTV it shows up silver. Right. That's really just putting more of a kind of discrepancies into it, isn't it?
Yeah.
He says that the prosecution didn't do anything to sort of fight their case, really, that this Avensis was Paul Murphy's. You know, we're a city in Dublin, 1 million people live. How many taxis are there moving around? This is the most popular make of a taxi. So what did they do? They said that there was a tax and insurance disc on the left-hand corner, and he said that, you know, 99.99% of cars and taxis have display their tax and insurance on the left-hand corner, which I do. There's some stickers apparently on the back. One of them seems to be a halo stickers. He said they're not very distinctive, and again, they could be anywhere. He talks about the quality of the CCTV, that you know, when they're giving the evidence that this is Paul Murphy's taxi travelling around the city in the same way as I was talking to you about Bonnie's car, he says that, you know, they say, look, that's the taxi again, there's the look at the wheels, and look at the tyres, but they didn't. He says the state didn't do anything to really qualify what was different about those wheels and those tyres, that it's like saying, look, there's the car, it has 4 wheels on it.
Yeah.
He said that given the scale of importance of what the state are inferring about Paul Murphy, that he would have thought that they could have given more sort of identifications, I suppose, on the car to prove that it was it. He talks about the glare on the cameras, that sometimes that they'll be saying there's a sticker here on the window, but actually it could be a glare of a camera. It could be the window reflecting something that's in the car. He says that there's rain during that day because you can see in the background people have umbrellas up, and is this raindrops some of the stuff that they're pointing to on the car. So Paul Murphy said he was out working that day. He said that at 13:14, 1:15 that day, he pulled into the Maxwell service station, and he says he volunteered that information to the Gardaí when they spoke to him, that he had pulled into the Maxwell service station. But sure enough, there was a CCTV camera on that station. So he's saying, like, he told them that before they knew.
Right.
So he bought a sandwich there, and then he drove up to the Beachcomber, where he said he saw a space and reversed into it and presumably ate a sandwich that he'd bought. And Bernard Condon says that it was Paul Murphy that told them all that, so he's admitting that. And then they go and find out same. Where they're coming from with that is that he wasn't trying to hide what he was doing that day.
So I mean, the state obviously went first, and they say they described his explanation, for example, for the key card found at Buckingham Village, that he just found this key card randomly. They described that explanation as laughable. They described on one occasion a number on Mr. Murphy's phone, and that is the number of Eddie Hutch at one point. And they say the taxi receipts that Kevin Murphy made available, which you didn't really hear much about, I don't think, exactly.
A little bit, yeah.
But what they said was that the taxi receipts tell a lie, and that his car is seen going into Buckingham Village. At no point is he seen walking out himself. They say, there's one way in and one way out, effectively, and he's not seen leave. And that, when put all together, the state's case is clear, basically.
So defence, Bernard Condon says that, he's admitted he was at the Beachcomber. He says he turned out of the Beachcomber at 13:41, and he rejects, this is where the state have said the cars are cheek by jowl. Sorry, I see that in my notes. So he rejects that completely, that the car is cheek by jowl with the black BMW. At 2:00 that day, these cars are at Donnycarney Church, the state say, and there's a piece of CCTV where you can see the corner of the top of the taxi plate. And Bernard Condon said that's just simply not enough evidence to say that this is the Avensis car that has been driven by Paul Murphy. He denies that he was in that church. He says, when you talk about the key card, I'll find the notes on it, but I remember this because he basically said that, is it not possible that Patsy Hutch was in the car and dropped the key card? He was the one that had all the key cards, the identical key cards, and given that the car was leased from Eddie Hutch, etc., could he not have dropped it in the car or left it in the car at some point? So there's an explanation for that from the defence, obviously. Now Condon says that the chain is broken, this sort of the CCTV chain of the car moving, and it's broken by Donnycarney Church. So it's really broken, he says, by 1:45. And so therefore they don't accept that that was before the cars were supposed to have pulled into St. Vincent's GAA club, and he says therefore he doesn't believe the state have proved that it is Paul Murphy's Avensis that is in the Vincent's GAA club. Now, I don't know what the legalities of that is, the chain being broken of CCTV.
Well, you
can hardly be expected to have every second of...
No, it's not a there's not a
drone following the cars or anything.
No, so the state, I suppose, are relying on a kind of common sense, overall picture to be put together. And obviously the defence are trying to attack that common sense picture.
Yeah.
Exactly. There's CCT garnished from, I presume, hundreds of locations and pierced together painstakingly.
Yeah.
And the state's case is it's obvious what had happened.
Yeah.
And that, you're allowed put together evidence to make an overall picture. The defence's case is obviously, if there's a gap, it kind of falls asunder, I suppose.
Yeah. So he basically then sort of came to his conclusion-ish. Oh God, wait now, a few more pages, but he does sort of start to kind of summarise now. He says his first point is that the CCTV evidence doesn't stand up to the standard it should, for given what the state are trying to prove against his client, that it's poor quality in a lot of cases. And he gave the judges particular time frames to go look at, and he sort of said to them he'd leave it up to themselves, but there's times that this car is in the frames that he just doesn't believe. It could be any car, kind of, he's saying. The second thing was, Paul Murphy early on said that his car might have been cloned. He threw that in, and it sounded a bit ludicrous actually when it was thrown in that your car could be cloned. But actually Bernard Condon says they have provided evidence to the court from an expert saying that this is a problem in taxis. The taxis are being cloned, and it was something that he says his client Paul Murphy said to the Gardaí from the beginning, that this cloning was obviously a problem. The expert that they brought in said it is a problem and it's not an off the wall thing to say. So he says that you cannot see the plate or the reg in the CCTV, obviously.
No, well, I mean, you obviously can see it at some times. For example, he's pulled into the garage and you can see Paul Murphy. So he's saying that you can see it at times. In other places in this convoy, you don't see it.
Yes.
And that while he's not saying his taxi has been cloned, he's saying that is a possibility.
Yes, he's saying if you could identify the plate or the reg, you could prove that it hadn't been cloned. But he's saying that the state haven't proved that it wasn't cloned, right? So the taxi receipts, he says, are what they are. Now, he says that if the state are saying that those taxi receipts aren't legitimate, they didn't put forward proof that the taxi meter in that car wasn't calibrated correctly. And they didn't seek to kind of prove what they were saying. Now, I think that's quite a good point, in a way. You could have... could the state not have, maybe the taxi meter wasn't...
I mean, we don't know. I suppose we don't know enough about taximeters.
No, I know nothing about them.
Exactly. So, is it possible to...
I know very little about most things.
Yeah, but so it's been proven that I know even less, arguably. But certainly. So, I mean, that's obviously.
But I mean, even surely wouldn't it have been an idea to say that we couldn't find out whether it was accurate or it wasn't accurate,
possibly, or how easy it is or difficult it is to produce fraudulent receipts. I don't know how. We don't know. We don't know,
but but the state didn't say that either, So anyway, number 4 was the key card, as I've explained. It could have been left in the car. Number 5 is the 31st of May, when he is quizzed, obviously, about the key card. In the first interview, he says he knows Neddy Hutch, but by May, when he's been questioned, Paul Murphy, he does know Eddie Hutch, and Eddie Hutch has been murdered, he's saying. So if he's not giving, again, I think probably similar to what Fitzgerald was saying about Bonney, by the time they're being questioned, there's real fear there. And he does know Eddie Hutch, and Eddie Hutch has been tragically murdered at that time. Yes, because he's a number of interviews. He says in the 5th interview, in the 3rd interview, he talks about being in fear for his own safety. When he's shown the CCTV, and in the 5th interview he's asked about the key card. So he obviously then is evasive about it. He must have said he didn't know anything about it, but he later admits he does. But I think basically what they're saying there in the defence is similar to Bonney. There was, this was May, the feud was very much underway, and these people were afraid of being linked to the Regency.
There's a reason for the reason for their inconsistency, I suppose.
Yeah, in an actual fact, he talks about the Hutch family basically being, people that people didn't want to claim they knew them at that point.
But obviously, and I mean, there is obviously a legitimate concern in that Noel Duckay Kieran, for example, I mean, it seems to have been killed solely because he was at the funeral.
Was it the end of that year? No, that was 2018, December 2018.
Possibly, was it? Yeah, but I mean, that's for an example. That is the threat level that like he.
Yeah, there was a really high threat level.
Yeah.
Look, in May.
Yeah.
I mean, by February, Eddie Hutch was the first to be killed. Then the next person to be killed was Michael Barr in the March.
Yeah.
And then in the May of that year, Gareth Hutch was killed, and previous to that, Noel Duggan had been killed in the Easter.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there had been a lot of murders there. Now he got on to talk about Buckingham Village, and again, as I said to you, Gerry Hutch showed interest in that. So that was his fifth point, was these interviews, the memos of the interviews, and how evasive he was, maybe about the key card. And his next point, obviously, is going back to Buckingham Village and what he had to say about that the state didn't really properly qualify what they meant by the centre of the plans and the kind of the HQ, and also that they didn't prove that these people were seen talking together or anything in advance of it. So he says that he says that there was very little evidence given about what was the Hutch organised crime gang. I found that quite interesting, because the reason there was only a little bit of evidence, because when they initially brought Detective Superintendent, give him his proper title, David Gallagher, into the court, he wasn't allowed in to give the evidence because there was objections by the defence.
Yes.
They didn't want him to give the evidence.
By Gerry Hutch's defence, I suppose.
By Gerry Hutch's defence, and probably not the other two, maybe it was Gerry Hutch's defence. Anyway, the reason that there was a short amount of evidence given was because of the objections, I think, and there was an agreement that he'd only say a certain amount.
I mean, the state did also address that evidence yesterday and said that that they're under Irish law, that people in the Gardaí that have knowledge and have expertise are allowed to give evidence, and the evidence of opinion, and that the court is entitled to accept that. And that evidence was given clearly by somebody with a deep knowledge of organised crime and the Hutch organised crime gang, and that can be accepted by the court clearly.
Yeah. So, he homed in on the fact that it was intergenerational and familial, and he said that they didn't say, was it the older Hutches or the younger Hutches that sort of, were
directed operations,
exactly. So he concluded basically by saying that, in his opinion, and it will be up to the judges to decide, the evidence against Paul Murphy is razor thin, he said. He said the evidence of the convoy is very weak, and he said if he was in such a convoy and he knew what was going to happen, which is what the charge is, that he has to be aware that he's facilitating an event or whatever that this organised crime group are going to carry out. He says, why would he drive his own taxi? Surely if he was going to take that role, he would have driven a different car. He says that to conclude that the burden of proof simply hasn't been made by the state, haven't made a case that proves their case, he says.
Which is the same defence from each of the three defendants, that there is, like Gerry Hutch's defence was quite interesting actually yesterday, when he's, even in his own defence said, he clearly has some knowledge of events around the Regency, and it may even be a provable case, or certainly a case that could be made about knowledge of the weapons, but that you haven't got over the reasonable doubt for murder. And that the two defendants today are also saying the same thing. They may have known this person, that person, but they just haven't proved it beyond a reasonable doubt. And that is the core of what we're getting to, and it's what people are stopping you. No doubt way more you than me, and saying to them, is there enough?
Yes.
Has it got over that?
The interest is just phenomenal in this, and as you said from the beginning, it's different when you're sitting in court and you're listening to everything, and people are hearing a report and they're going, oh, he's going to be jailed, that's him gone, etc. I suppose an observation of mine for this is, between the three defences, while the three of them have the same at heart, they're saying that the state hasn't proved the cases against them. For Bonney and Murphy, the state is saying they are there on the day. Yeah. So with Hutch, as his senior counsel Brendan Graham pointed out, the state don't even have evidence he was in the country on the day of the murder.
However, the state is clearly saying, arguably at this very late stage, that Gerry Hutch not only was there in the Regency and a part of the conspiracy, but that he was one of the gunmen, one of the dressed as a guard. You probably should have let off, though, all of this with when is it all, the verdict going to come?
Oh, well, the verdict, yeah, I mean, that was great, actually, because, you know, then it just finished and Bernard Condon sat down and it was like, oh, we feel like we've been at a really long sort of a thing here and this is the end of it. And, of course, Justice Tara Byrne said that she would, indicated anyway, that she was going to give us an idea when the verdict is coming, which is really helpful, actually, for everybody, I'm sure. And they went off and came back and said that the first day of term in after Easter is April the 17th. So that is the day they will deliver their verdict, if not before that, but it was unlikely it would be before that. And I called it because I did say that it would be before the Easter holidays, but in actual fact they'll have finished their deliberations and they'll have had their have their judgment ready, I presume, before the Easter holidays, if they're coming in the day the term. So in a little sort of a smug...
I was right all along.
I was right once in my life, maybe, we'll say. We were having a couple of bets before they came back out amongst us. Mick Doyle decided they were going to be back by February the 13th, I think he said. Paul Healy reckoned by St. Patrick's Day, and Sean Murray just threw date out of the air. He just said he'd take this one because no one else was, and I said the end. Like, I actually said before the Easter holidays. So
you were closest.
You know that game where you win loads of money if you get closest to something? It's like one of those things on the television. No, it was
Who Wants to Be a Millionaire? Or?
No, it was something else. But I would have gone home with all the money if I had have put some. So
that's, I mean, that is a long wait for the defendants, I think. But you know, that's the way it is. I mean, that is another.
They're still on bail. There was a question about whether they were going to be left on bail or put into custody.
Though Gerry Hutch, of course, is in custody.
He's in custody, but the other two are out on bail, and the judge just warned them basically that the conditions of their bail are even more important now because the judges are deliberating. I think usually people might be put into custody while a trial finishes and the verdict awaits.
Sometimes. I mean...
So the state didn't look for them to be put into custody. They're obviously not a flight risk or anything like it.
I mean, it is. So it's at that point then, on that date, they'll come back. You know, normally, I mean, I was there, say, for Joe O'Reilly, and the jury, they had I think it was a 3-day wait, and people, it was really long.
Well,
you
came in on a Saturday. I remember that.
Yeah, I do remember that. So, but I think it was 3 or 4 days. It was a really long wait because from the case ending to the jury deciding, and then they just come back. They don't say. They come back and say guilty or not guilty. They don't come back saying Joe O'Reilly was convicted because of the CCTV evidence or because of the late or whatever you want. But that's totally different than the special criminal court.
They'll explain exactly why they've come to the conclusion.
As in, we reject this bit of evidence, we find this bit very credible, that bit not credible. And they come back, I mean, it's going to be, on that day, it'll be a 90-page document or a 100-page, will it?
Very lengthy. And I'm sure they realise the weight of this case, the importance of it. How much is 54 days in the special criminal court going to cost with all those legal people?
And not just that. I mean, there's been
police,
there's
been
I mean, I don't know,
millions,
just loads and loads. I mean, there's been a dozen at least police officers, squillions.
Yeah, no, seriously, but seriously, it has cost the state, the taxpayer, so much money. And that's before you start looking at the security that remains in place up in Patsy Hutch's house.
Yeah, I mean, that's,
that, and before you look at the cost of, Jonathan Dowdall and his entire family going into witness protection, being protected for how long we don't know.
Well, I mean, look, it's going to be a 7-figure sum at the least, one way or another.
And I mean, and I've spoken to a lot of people, about, it's really all anybody wants to talk about is the Hutch trial. But like, a lot of people kind of are saying that, you look at the state of the health service. Yeah. People who've had elderly relatives on trolleys and, people have died on trolleys. It is horrendous. Yeah. And you really see that in the winter time when a lot of people are getting sick and people with underlying conditions are getting infections and there's a risk of stroke, and the hospital system is just creaking.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that you don't
can't
pay
spend
the
money
money.
on justice.
You
No, but
you
it
can't
is
just spend the money on one aspect and all the rest of it. But this has cost, I'd say this must be the most expensive trial probably the state has put on, certainly in recent times, in recent memory. And the focus will be on the Special Criminal Court.
Yeah.
And it needs to bring in the right verdict.
Well, it needs to, yes. Look, the judges make a decision independent of public opinion, obviously, not to state the obvious, but there is a broader implication for all of these things, and people need to have, of course, confidence in that the right things are being done.
The right thing is the right
and
verdict.
And that, they also have to have confidence that the police.
I mean the burden, because there is just so much focus on this trial. I mean, I think that trials are happening all the time in the Special Criminal Court. There's people being brought before it on money laundering charges that you'd sometimes miss some of the stuff that goes on in the Special Criminal Court. But this is a real eye-opener to the entire country and beyond. What the Special Criminal Court is, why it's there, and I suppose then when you look at the wider thing, the cost of it to the state, etc., and the value of it to the state and the value of it in fighting organised crime. So, I think all eyes are on it, and all eyes will be on the verdict, and there's a lot of pressure to
and the
bring
verdict,
in the right
of course,
one.
as I said, the verdict is there. It'll be in black and white.
Yes.
And it'll then be, there to be analysed. But
and of course it can be appealed. Now, say for example, hypothetically, let's say Gerry Hutch walked, he was found not guilty. Could the state appeal?
No.
So if he was found guilty, he could appeal, obviously.
He could appeal to a higher court, the Supreme Court or whatever. But no, if you can't be tried for the same crime twice, I mean, that's double jeopardy. That's
so the DPP can only appeal the length of sentences or whatever.
Yes, which obviously for Gerry Hutch's case, it's a life sentence is
so
automatic if found guilty. But they can appeal the length of the leniency of the sentence.
So in other words, if he was found, hypothetically, if he was found not guilty, he's walking away a free man, and they can't come after him again for murder.
However, could they come after him for direct other charges?
We're still
but they
in
can't. But we probably shouldn't get too hypothetical.
No.
But what is said in court on this occasion, I don't think can be used against him in another trial. If you know what I mean, that would have to be introduced from scratch again. So. And
what about Jonathan Dowdall? Because maybe we'll just park our
speculation
and our speculation on the verdict here. But what about Dowdall? The investigation into the Regency Hotel is ongoing. There's still a team in place that's investigating it. And clearly Dowdall has said publicly that he has got information on lots of other people during this trial. He has in particular placed Patsy Hutch at the centre of things. He's named James Mago Gately. He's named Patrick Hutch, who was tried for murder, and there was a null prosequi entered by the state, so he cannot be retried for murder. So does he, if we go forward, if there's further charges brought, does he keep giving evidence, or does it?
Well, I think
do they wait and see how he gets on, kind of thing?
Well, I suppose he absolutely could give evidence again against other people, whoever they might be.
But presumably only if his evidence is accepted. I mean, you wouldn't throw him in again if it was ridiculed, for example. Or
no, the DPP would get a file from the Gardaí saying, we have Jonathan Dowdall. This is all hypothetical. We have Jonathan Dowdall here, and he can give evidence against X. And it'd be up for the DPP to assess that then.
But and
they would look.
Presumably, will wait and see how the judiciary view him as a witness.
Yes, they will look at that. They will assess that, and then, as decide to bring a charge or not bring a charge. And the Gardaí will put forward a number of charges, possibly against somebody, and they can decide. We'll go for that. In this case, we'll go for a murder charge, but in this case, we'll go for a lesser charge like facilitation or like weapons. So, but would there an appetite to bring Jonathan Dowdall back again? Would you have an appetite to sit through him again?
Niall.
Yeah.
I'll just tell you one thing, right?
Yeah.
I might resign if I was asked to go another 2 weeks listening to him in... I mean, anybody who wants to know what Jonathan Dowdall was like, and we're actually going to not say too much about him because we're going to do something for Saturday, which is a little bit different, and it'll be somewhat focused on Jonathan Dowdall. But in the meantime, if anybody wants to kind of... just close their eyes and get an idea of what it was like to sit for 8 days listening to this man. Just listen to the Joe Duffy interview.
Yeah.
That was him.
Yeah.
Wasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, passionately, you know,
banging on
about his innocence,
about how amazing he was and all the work he'd done in the community. And
I saw the Star. You have to give them credit. They in his defence, it said they quoted Bart Simpson actually, which I thought I recognised that quote. I didn't do it. Nobody saw me do it. You know. So you have to give credit to the Star. They picked out the Bart Simpson.
Bart Simpson,
and put him on the thing.
Yeah, Bart Simpson was kind of likeable though, little rogue, wasn't he?
Well,
I was actually going to just say to you, do you remember back then when you're talking about when the juries used to take days on end to, well, sometimes to come up with it.
Yeah.
But do you remember they had to stop putting them in hotels?
Yeah.
Because they used to put them in a hotel, and there was sort of kind of an idea of they enjoying this.
Yeah,
they'd take an extra few days.
Watching Sky Sports.
Well, there was certainly sort of
ice cream.
Kind of humour around the idea that they were kicking back in the hotel on the phone to room service, and let me think about that some more. But then they just started sending. They do send them home now, and they do a great service. I'm not saying that they didn't.
Yes,
back in the
absolutely.
day deserve their hotels, but so. Okay, we're not totally finished with this, obviously, because we will be awaiting a verdict, and we're gonna do something a bit different for Saturday. But that's it for the moment. As in that when Bernard Condon sat down and said sort of he was done, there was a bit of a sigh of relief around the place, and I'd say a couple of people who've been working very hard on this case. Certainly the team that are there, the Garda team that are there, day in, day out, through those files and everything. I'm sure they will be enjoying a nice cold or warm glass of wine tonight, or whatever is their tipple, and just, you know, moving on to something new.
Moving on. But of course we'll be back.
Yeah, we'll be back.